here's a secret for the people going to RASP. There's an event called a 2-3-2 where you ruck 2 miles, you run 3 miles, and then you ruck another 2 miles. The cadre have their rucks on too. They're rucking with you. They're running with you. They're there the whole time. And I think that is so important to not only the assessment selection process for like, hey, we're getting eyes on, but for establishing a standard for expectation of how you're going to lead and how you're going to be led.
Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Mops and Mo's with Drew and Alex. Alex, who do we have joining us this week?
We got a good one. And in this particular case, unlike previous ones, I'm actually going to read this bio word for word because it's a solid bio. Thanks, Tyler.
Solid bio.
So Tyler Fillion is currently the company first sergeant and senior enlisted advisor for the 75th Ranger Regiment Selection and Training Company. The company conducts assessment and selection programs known as RASP1 and RASP2, as well as a pre-Ranger school course known as Small Unit Ranger Tactics. They also run an extensive pre-RASP program that prepares service members for RASP1. Tyler joined the Army in 2005, served initially in 2nd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division, where he did a 15-month deployment to Baghdad during the surge from August 06 to November 07, and a follow-on 12-month deployment to Iraq in 2008. Between those deployments, he attended Ranger School and encountered some young privates from Ranger Regiment, and upon coming home, attended one of the first editions of RASP1 in 2010. He was assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion, completed a myriad of follow-on courses and deployments. Tyler served in multiple positions in 3rd Battalion and was assigned to the Regimental Headquarters, where he served for 15 months as the LNO to Airborne School and Sand Hill doing recruiting, which he describes as a, quote, formative experience. Tyler then completed RASP2 and was assigned to 1st Battalion in Savannah, where he was a platoon sergeant, recon platoon sergeant, staff NCO, and company first sergeant. He was then selected to come back to Fort Moore and was assigned to selection and training in August of 2022. Tyler holds a master's degree in psychology with a focus on industrial and organizational psychology, and he specifically wants the Mops and Mo's team to mention that it was achieved using Army tuition assistance, unit-level education counselors, and a chain of command that wanted to see him be the very best version of himself. Again, I am reading this bio word for word. Finally, Tyler cares deeply about human performance, is a huge believer in H2F, and loves training and preparing soldiers and rangers for the hardest day of ground combat. He believes our environment is like it has never been before, and we owe it to our nation and people to adapt as fast as possible to provide our soldiers the best possible chance to be ready when the moment arrives. Preparing for that moment also makes you a better person.
I think that's the most inspirational bio we've had.
I feel motivated. I'm going to go work out.
I'm going to go to RASP. But yeah, no, this was, well, I guess I should say, first of all, for folks listening in on this thinking that you're going to get some insider secrets on the Ranger process, whether that's Ranger School or RASP, you're not. He keeps a lot of that stuff close to the chest for obvious reasons. But like you mentioned, he is very passionate about physical culture, especially as it pertains to sort of the current landscape of physical culture. And we ask him some different questions about what are some of the most common failures people experience going through these programs, what drives a lot of the successes, how do the changes in Army culture around the ACFT play into some of this stuff. And it's one of those conversations that goes a lot of different places, but I think every single one of those places was really interesting.
Yeah, and this is a guy who has seen professionalized human performance get integrated into the units he's in over the course of a career, and I think he had some really good insight onto how that works, what the cultural change that's associated with it looks like, how it can benefit an organization, how they have to kind of sort out the roles between coaches and staff and then NCOs who are leading the units and things like that. So a lot of really cool insight from a guy who's been out there doing it for a full career.
And if his bio did not get you psyched up to go run through a wall, certainly the conversation will. So enjoy. That was pretty Hal Moore-like, actually. Doughboy Stadium, let's go.
Yeah, good. I love Doughboy Stadium.
All right, so I screwed up and I said RASP range. I screwed it up. Correct me now that we're recording.
Okay. I love Ranger School. If I had to pick one developmental part of my career that I would not want to let go of, it would be Ranger School. However, Ranger School is a TRADOC unit. It's a school. 75th Ranger Regiment is an operational unit. It's a special operations unit. Falls under USAC. Do a bunch of different things, but it is not Ranger School. So I don't know if that clears it up.
This also is an important clarification. I think most of our Army listeners probably already get this, but we have a fair number of people that are coming to this from like the strength and conditioning world or medical or something like that. And that is also where the clarification is between Ranger qualified and being a Ranger.
Tabbed versus scrolled.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the school is a great accomplishment. I think some people get too wrapped up, a little too wrapped up in that sometimes, like go to Ranger School. That's a huge accomplishment, but don't get on social media and get wild about like tabs versus scrolls,
Oh man. Can you explain RASP? And this can get as broad as we want to, but can you explain it, kind of what you're looking for, some of the physical demands? I know a lot of this is probably online for better or for worse, but from where you sit, what is all of that?
Okay, RASP is well, there's two levels to RASP. There's RASP1, which I think we'll probably talk the most about. And that is E1 through E5. So it's Ranger Assessment Selection Program 1. It changed from a 3-week program, which used to be called RIT, prior to 2000 or just at around 2010, to meet the demands really of the GWAT. And what RASP is it's an assessment selection program where really we create what I think is just really a venue for people to demonstrate the qualities that we're after, which we're really looking for, like the RSOP attributes, integrity, courage, personal responsibility, professionalism, team player, similar to other special operations units. So we provide that kind of in our own way, with our own flavor. The first 4 weeks of the course, I think, I know they're definitely the most intense. Physically, do you have to be an Olympic athlete to make it through? No. Do you have to be able to like turn out 6-minute miles over and over? No, you don't. But do you have to have a general level of physical fitness that is probably above an average soldier? You do. We give people an opportunity to build that up in Pre-RASP, which I think we can probably circle back around to that. But really, I think the secret to RASP is it gives people opportunities, because it's 8 weeks long, to continuously grow those attributes and demonstrate them. Now, there are physical standards that you need to meet. So just right off the bat, cut and dry, you have to pass our fitness test, which we recently just changed to kind of align with the ACFT. 41 hand release push-ups, 235 plank, 40-minute or faster 5-mile, and 6 chin-ups. You got to be able to do a 12-mile foot march, 35 pounds dry, meaning like your water and your helmet, which you will carry, don't count as weight. That's 3 hours. And those are the two major physical standards that you have to meet. We also have candidates do the RPAT, the Ranger Physical Assessment Test, which is 2 miles in kit, a rope climb, a Skidco drag, back to a caving ladder. From there, do what is supposed to be a sprint, but is usually like a walk / trot by that point. And then you gotta hop an 8-foot wall. So those, for us, that's kind of our bread and butter, but it's not overly job specific, but it's really like, hey, you got to be able to meet these standards. You got to be able to do these things. And you have to show that you're not just going to give up when it gets hard, and that you're going to be able to continue to be a team player throughout the events, good attitude. So that's really, I think, what we're looking for overall.
So does it tend to be not keeping up with physical expectations that leads to people having a hard time with RASP, or does it tend to be issues with the other components that you guys are looking for?
Well, probably both. I think what came first? Like the fact that you got really, really stressed out because you were physically maxed out? Like, is that what caused you stress? So really why people leave RASP? I think one of the primary reasons is we would term it as you self-assess, right? So you go out and you have a couple bad days, and we do a lot of worm PT in there because the worm is like a great equalizer. You have a bad day or two on there and you can't rally, and a lot of the candidates that just end up saying, well, you're not what I'm looking for. And they decide on their own, which we tell them this all the time. You're not here to assess and select yourself. You're just here to do your best. So that's one reason. Another reason is people just end up saying, hey, this just isn't for me, which is a kind way of just, taking a gentleman or lady's exit out. So those are really the two primary reasons. I think it's like a resiliency factor in there, but is it because of fitness? That probably has a lot to do with it. But I think also we see really fit people that just, ring the bell, for lack of a better term.
You guys, because we've talked before with folks involved in different selection programs, and there's conversations around debriefing people that pass and or fail. Is that part of it? And I guess if that is part of it, what are common themes that you see on either side of the coin in terms of people that pass and people that fail?
Have you ever seen, it's a Pegasus company. I don't know if you're familiar with like the British paras. They have a great documentary about their process. But to answer your question, check that documentary out. I think you'd like it. But
Boom, show notes.
There is a counseling process at the end, and we do a small amount of just data capturing on the end as to why people leave, and we do try to leave people hopeful. We do try to let people know that hey, you can come back here when you're ready, and here are some things that you probably need to work on. But you do need to come in shape. But to circle back to the pre-RASP thing is we will give people an ample amount of time in pre-RASP to get in shape. And we have a codified program that we use to do that. Usually before people class up in RASP1, when I grab all the data, 150 soldiers of who's about to class up, the average run time might be a 34-minute 5 mile. So if you go sell that to the Army and be hey, I got 70 people here who just failed RASP1, and this is the quality of their physical performance. I think that's pretty good. So we do a good job, I think, on the front end. I know we do a good job on the front end, thanks to the cadre, and their just tireless effort to meet these people where they're at and just give them an opportunity with a very scaled approach to get better, to really pass RASP1.
Can we talk pre-RASP? Because I know we've circled it a couple of times. Just what is that?
So take it from the start, right? So you show up, you can join from a bunch of different places, right? We have over 60 MOSs in the regiment. So you might be a parachute rigger from, I think it's Fort Gregg Adams now. You go up off the bus to pre-RASP. Right off the bat, you're going to be received. You're going to get in process. We're going to start teaching you some stuff, like how to pack your ruck. I know there's a lot of comments on our Instagram about ruck packing. We actually teach that 3 or 4 times before the class starts. We teach map reading. We teach a lot of the skills that are in there. But I think really what we do is we do a scaled approach to very similar PT to what soldiers are going to see in RASP1. And we ramp it up as we approach class up. And then about 3 weeks out from class up, we take a PT test. And those who meet the class up standard, we put them into RASP1. Those who do not, we talk to them and tell them, hey, look, statistically, your chances of success right now maybe aren't as good as they would be if you stayed for another 4 or 5 weeks. And in those 4 or 5 weeks, we just do all of the basic things, which I think, Alex, when you visited, we kind of talked about this. What do you need to do to be a soldier? Well, you need a good level of aerobic fitness. You need to be able to climb, jump, bound, run. We don't need you to like clean and jerk yet. Like we will teach you that later, but it's really about preparing for the rigors of the course. So Pre-RASP does that in like a very scientific manner. The guy that's in charge of it right now, shout out to him. He's a certified strength and conditioning coach. He has a degree in, I think, strength and conditioning or kinesiology. Super interested in it, passionate about it. And it is a really well-built program. I think without that, given the candidates that we're receiving from initial military training, we would be in a lot worse position than kind of what we're in right now. But we're not in the business of like complaining about that. Like all we care about is, say, the day you show up, like we're here to train you. Once you go into RASP1, you're in assessment selection mode. So that's kind of pre-RASP. There's a lot more. We are a microcosm of like the H2F overall. We have cognitive in there. We have nutrition in there. But we really try to prepare these people to be successful.
Have you noticed a change in sort of the overall, I don't know, archetype of selectees coming through or candidates coming through the program? Because that's another theme that we've hit on in a number of episodes, just sort of the change in culture around, Americans at large, no pun intended, but specifically the military. And have you guys noticed that in the last couple of years, just the change in who's coming to the program?
So you use the word archetype.
It's a college word. It's my Harvard word.
Yeah. It's the archetype is the same, right? It's the warrior, right? It's the archetype of the warrior. It's the person that like wants to stick their hand out into the unknown and be like, hey, what's out there? That is strong. That is still there. And if it wasn't, like we wouldn't have a program. So I think that the thing that people show up, it's that what they're actually after, it's the same as it's always been. Now, if we were to just imagine that thing as a fire, right? Like for some, maybe 20 years ago, it was a bonfire. I think now maybe the fire is just like, maybe it's a little bit smaller, right? Because there's other factors in there, but I think the desire is still there. Now, the condition of the people that are arriving, I wasn't paying attention to it 15 years ago or 10 years ago because that wasn't my job. But I think that it is different. I think that even just talking to people that work where I work now, they used to take the 300 candidates they had, and whoever didn't max the PT test to class up, they might not make it in the course. Now we have to train people for 6 weeks. Now the quality that comes out of the back end of RASP1, I think, is the same, if not better. And that 6 weeks might have actually done the unit some benefit, right? Because we're training them in our way to meet our demands. But I can't like accurately tell you like, yeah, for sure, these guys aren't as good as the guys 10 years ago because I don't know. But I can tell you that the thing that they're after is the same thing that I was after, 18 years ago. They want to touch the fire. They want a journey. They want to go out and just explore the craziest place in the Army that they can find.
So you touched on something there that I want to ask about, and I'll throw it back to when I met you, because like right around the corner from you were some pre-RASP guys getting ready to go to RASP, working out, doing all sorts of stuff, and just looking at them superficially, they don't look like anything particularly special physically, right? They're like relatively normal dudes. You said like above the average for the Army, but like nothing crazy, like relatively normal. But then just like a few blocks away, I go look at the product that comes out the back end of RASP and is actually in operational Ranger battalions. And to be honest, those guys are something pretty special physically. Like something that you're doing there is working.
Smaller t-shirts.
And I would love to know, like,
mediums.
Yeah, what's going on between when they arrive for pre-RASP and that 6 weeks of training and what you're producing, not necessarily immediately on the back end of RASP. Maybe it's being embedded in that culture for a few years that does it, but like what what is it? Is it the strength and conditioning, or is it the culture around the strength and conditioning? Just curious about that process.
I think it's probably all that. So for one, I think that we have something that is really a part of what our program measures, right? Is like just commitment. Like if you really want to be there, that's a huge help, right? The other thing that we have is we have legacy, where I think that our unit has performed well in combat. So we don't necessarily combat as much as the Army does, I think, of people maybe being like, this isn't good for me, or we shouldn't do this, because they look around at their squad leader and that's what he's doing. And that guy's jacked, and he's moving out. So that helps. It's like some of those things all help, right? We also put these people through a selection process to make sure that they have some of these qualities. So then you take that person, right? And it's like the age-old question, like, would you rather have like the ability, or let me ask you this, like, Drew, what's your bench?
Geez, I wish you didn't ask me that. Not enough. 285, maybe 295.
Okay. So if I told you that you could bench 305 for the rest of till you're 70, or you want to bench big, right? You could have the desire to want to bench more. And you just like, that was your secret ingredient, was just this desire to want to do more. Which one would you take? It's the desire, right?
So I can bench 305 until I'm 70, or have the desire to bench more. I see what you're saying. Yes.
For the rest of your life, right? I think the thing that we have is that our people, first of all, have that like desire, right? It's like they want to do it. The second thing that we have is we have a cultural secret weapon that from the day that you show up, our love language in our unit is really, it's about affective trust. It's about like, hey, I know that this person cares about me. So when they're telling me like, hey, we're going to go and we're going to work out, we're going to do this thing, it's because I actually want to prepare you for combat. I actually want to take care of you. So you take those things and then you layer them in to QF program that has already existed for, I think, about 13 years. And you go, hey, we got to get better at all these things. How are we going to do it? You go down to a coaching staff and you get a program, right? And probably by the time that your squad leader is a squad leader, he's probably been to our like internal unit education program like 2 or 3 times. Like I think I've personally done the barbell training, or like our raw training, Ranger Athlete Warrior training, like 3 times. So what are you responsible for at that point as a squad leader? Are you responsible for coming up with a program? Well, maybe, and some guys still do that. Or are you responsible for going up every day and doing what's on the sheet, taking care of your subordinates by like being in the right uniform, the right place, the right time, and being responsible for the program? That's how you get those guys that are really fit. Like Alex, after you came, I think you posted something. You're like, I don't know about these guys in the gym. I don't remember what it was. And I almost hit you up and said, why don't you come on back and visit? And I'll take some cadre out of there, right? Because it's really about like discipline to a process, not necessarily like some random thing that we're just going to do every day. And the edge that we have is committed people, a trust in our coaching staff and the resources that we have, and really just, it's about the process, not really the outcome. So you put 5 years of that on somebody that shows up, plus Ranger School and some other opportunities in there. What would you have been able to do if you knew what you know now, or somebody just made you do it, right? For like 8 or 10 years. Well, that's what our like squad leaders and platoon sergeants are, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a process.
I think that's awesome.
I want to ask, because you've talked, we've hit on the tradition of things quite a bit. And the Ranger tradition in the Army is prolific, but specifically for this piece of it, one of the things, and I'll kind of reference Big Army here, because we've seen now with H2F and with the ACFT, like this wholesale change in culture. And I don't think anybody prior to that change would have said the culture was necessarily bad, but here we are looking at a cultural change. And I'm curious for an organization like yours that is so steeped in tradition and history, and for good reason in a lot of cases, how do you guys create that change? Or is there room for change in terms of like, emerging physiology around how to train athletes, emerging science around, optimum nutrition? What does that look like for you guys without losing that piece that makes you so impressive, which is the culture and the tradition, if that makes sense?
Okay. I'm gonna try to come at this in a couple of ways. So, Alex, were you on the master fitness trainer team that came to first Ranger Battalion?
I was not.
Okay, so
I have heard about how it went though.
I have not. I want to hear how it went.
how did it go? So before I like put my foot in my mouth
well,
here,
well, first, are you talking about master fitness trainer? Or are you talking about when they launched the ACFT?
when they launched ACFT,
Yeah. So I think Dr. East might have mentioned this actually when he came on our podcast. I think he specifically cited like beta testing with Ranger Regiment and things like that. And he points to the testing they did there as like proof that things are already fine. Like there's not any like secret to this, because there was nobody there that was worried about failing. Like they'd never been training for the ACFT before. They never knew anything about it. But the only question was like, hey, what's it takes to max this thing? Awesome. Let's go do it.
yeah.
No further questions.
So I took that test. Nobody told us that we were taking the ACFT. They told us we were getting training on how to grade it. So we were like working out. I missed breakfast. One of my squad leaders, who's a complete machine, also missed breakfast, right? And we're in this class and they're setting the trap bars up, and we're like, what are we doing? And they're like, oh, you guys are taking this test. And we're like, oh, okay. I guess we're taking this test now. And I just remember, because I started my career in the conventional army, the look on the people's faces when the guys were kind of not, they weren't being rude, but they're just like, we got it. It's a trap bar deadlift. Hey, what's the max? And that was the question at everything. Now, you guys have posted about the deadlift specifically, and then like a couple other things. We were never worried about what the test was going to be. And there's like a bunch of reasons for that, right? If you're generally fit, you don't really care. You're just like, let's just do it. What is this thing? Yeah, let's go try it out. Let's go see what happens. When you know that like you don't have it, what is your reaction going to be? You're going to go, we don't want to do this. Oh, this is kind of silly. Which I'm not like saying that every counter to the ACFT is bad. I just think like, we weren't worried about it. And I don't know if that answers your question, but like generally people are kind of excited. They're like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is a good opportunity to like test a couple of different things. And I think that what our unit has done a good job of outside of our testing is on any given Tuesday, you could be like, hey, we're going to do a platoon PT comp. And you don't know what's going to be in that thing. You could be on the Versa climber for an hour, or you could be doing a stretch shoot, or you could be on the obstacle course. Like you just don't know. So I think because we have that like idea that like, hey, we could go to war tomorrow, and that's kind of our mindset. We don't really need to focus specifically on the ACFT, because you just do a bunch of everything in a controlled manner. And like the ACFT isn't really going to be a problem. So as a unit, when the Army was like, do the ACFT, and I remember our regimental commander was like, hey, they're asking for us to throw some scores in this thing. People were pumped up. We were like, hey, let's go try this thing out. The original runtime was pretty hard. It was like 11 minutes or something. Yeah.
11-minute 2-mile.
Guys love that though. They were
it was I think just sub 12 was like the original maxing score for 17 to 21. Yeah, it was pretty stout.
And then I think the deadlift was pretty heavy too. Yeah, I just remember people kind of being excited. They're like, oh, PT test that I can't max. This is awesome. Like I got something to work at now.
So you've triggered me for sure. I was not there to roll it out with the Rangers, but I did do a lot of like teaching people the ACFT for the first time, teaching them how to grade it, having them take it for the first time, all that kind of stuff. And I will tell you that the experience was pretty similar at every other unit I went to, and it looked nothing like how you describe it going with 175. It was 100% like trying to poke holes in it, trying to find gimmicks to get around just doing what they know they're supposed to do, like complaining about whether it's super relevant or not, like trying to like argue against the test in the first place, like just the sheer quantity of nonsense around like how can I avoid actually just going for it on this thing and taking it seriously was incredible. And then you talked about how guys were excited to like throw some scores in there and get after it and stuff. But I have witnessed places like two things stand out. One, routinely hearing about people, including relatively senior people, sandbagging the test so that when the scores got finalized, they would be lower. Like as long as we do really bad now, they'll have to lower the test once it's for record. That was a common thing. And then I do remember witnessing, and I'll go ahead and call out the unit. It was 18th Airborne Corps headquarters, and it was their ACFT. Probably like the first one they had to do as a unit, like right on that field, right in front of Corps headquarters. And like a guy crossed the finish line at like 21:50 something, and like pumped his arm in the air and said, "Yeah."
For the 2 mile?
Yeah, for the 2 mile. And
Yeah.
it hurt my soul. Like it was a little rough.
I'm gonna get a lot of grief at work now that you called out 18th Airborne Corps headquarters. Thank you.
I'm not sure what that's all about, to be honest. I mean, I could certainly throw some things out there. I'm not going to do it, but I'll go back to this, like the idea of, and I believe in this, and maybe I've been spoiled because I think I have the best leaders in the Army. Like, what is good leadership? It's like good leadership is like somebody who can like tell you how messed up you are, and you leave that conversation feeling so encouraged. Like that's good leadership. And I think that is like the Ranger Regiment, my experience in it, like we've cornered the market on that as like a skill. I know that my leaders, like from the RCO to RSM, if you're like, hey, we got to take an ACFT tomorrow, they'd be like, all right, cool, a little no notice challenge. Like they wouldn't be upset about it. And why? Because I think they care about our mission. Right. So if I look at them and I say, hey, these guys believe in it and they think it's going to make us better, somebody's obviously researched this thing or figured it out. Like, why don't we just like go all in and just like give it a shot and see what happens? You can't tell me that the Army won't be fitter if we just accept it and start trying to get better at it. Like, you can't tell me that. I don't think anybody could do it reasonably, at least not with a clean conscience.
I mean, we'll certainly have more fitness equipment regardless, which I think is a net positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the injury stuff, which you got me triggered now, like people talk about the injuries and everything. Like, I think that people really just nocebo themselves sometimes, where they're like, oh, if we do a deadlift, they're just going to get hurt. But no, actually, that's not true at all. Like you could get hurt, but probably not, you know?
So I think this would be an impossible study, but it'd be cool to see the rate of injury for people who deadlift versus who never deadlift ever. Because you could probably make the argument that non-deadlifters would be higher.
I have a running rule, and I think I have some friends who also have this rule. Actually, I know I do. If your back hurts, that you need to actually deadlift, because it just kind of pulls everything back into alignment. You feel a little bit better, you know? It's like if your back starts hurting, it's probably because you haven't been lifting enough weights. That might be more true than the opposite. You know?
I think you probably would get some people. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get ripped up in the comments for that.
You'll get equally ripped and then praised, I think. That's one of those statements that will divide it right in half.
Yeah.
Well, so this is a story that I think I might have told on the podcast before. I'm not sure. But I vividly remember it, and I talk about it all the time. It was early in when I was teaching Master Fitness Trainer, and I can't remember if it's afternoon of day 1 or morning of day 2 where you introduce the class to the deadlift. It's the first like movement instruction that happens during the course. And we had this lieutenant in the course. I think he was National Guard. I don't remember what state, but they had sent him because he was extremely fit, according to them.
Yeah, which I'm going to interrupt you. Like, why are you sending that guy?
So that's a whole conversation,
Okay.
and
Got it.
we'll get to that one for sure. But the when they said he's extremely fit at the time, that meant he was extremely good at the APFT, right? He could
Yeah.
do a lot of push-ups, he could do a lot of sit-ups, and he could run really fast. And so we're teaching people how to do the deadlift, and he throws out his back deadlifting something like 120 to 160 pounds, somewhere in that range.
How
And
much do you weigh?
I would ballpark him at 155, maybe 150. I don't know, like skinny guy, but fit, all that kind of stuff. But he throws out his back, and we ask him, like, hey, man, is this just like a freak accident? Like, what's going on? He's like, oh, no. Like, this kind of happens all the time. I'll be good in like a couple of days or something. Like, wait, you've been identified as extremely physically fit, but you routinely throw out your back lifting amount of weight that could be like a ruck, right?
Or person?
Like, or like dragging a person, or like fairly routine
Nah,
things.
you don't need to worry about that. It's not real. I mean,
Like that seems like a huge concern, and I don't know
Shout
like,
out
why
National
it
Guard.
wasn't. I don't
yeah,
know.
it's yeah. I mean, the resistance to a lot of it, it is hard to stomach. And I think professionally, I know for guys in our unit, it's hard for them to stomach too. You know, they're like, why are people so upset about this? You know, like it's actually going to make you better. You will be fitter if you just accept it. Like, and so what if your score isn't good? Like right now, if you train for the ACFT for 6 months, you're going to get a lot better, like quickly, especially if you haven't been training, especially if you've just been doing push-up, sit-up improvement, you know?
Do we think that resistance to the ACFT gets phased out over time, or do we think that it's just kind of baked into the early culture and it's just always going to be that way? I mean, I wasn't really around all that much with the APFT, but like, were people complaining about that for the entirety of its existence? This is a rhetorical, well, not even rhetorical. You guys can go.
I don't know. I didn't really experience that. I think the thing with the APFT is like you could kind of game it a little bit more and people knew how to play the game. You can't really play the game in the sprint drag carry. You can't really play the game on the deadlift. Like you're either picking it up or you're not, you know? So I think there's a component to that too, is like, it's a really hard test to kind of mess around with. And I think that people similar to the guy that Alex just described, there are a lot of people who kind of made their way in their units by, I experienced this a lot when I was in the conventional army. It was like, yeah, that guy's a PT stud, but he was the guy that Alex just described, you know. To answer your question, I think that it will eventually start to go away, which to my understanding, when the MFT folks visited us at 1st Battalion, that was kind of what the Army knew, is that like, hey, this is going to be rough for a little bit, but like in 10 years, like we'll have less injuries because of the way we're going to have to train. People will be better prepared for combat, whatever. Is like, we're just in that stage right now where it just hurts and people don't want to do it.
I think it's already getting better, to be honest. I think it's resistance to change. People have issues with it regardless. And I mean, having spent most of my time on active duty under the APFT, I think people knew it wasn't very predictive of your performance at your actual job. Like that was a fairly common thing. It took me until I was in my first unit. I remember there was an infantry company commander. I don't remember whether he was still in the S3 shop when I had this conversation with him or if he was already in command, but he was also a prior enlisted infantryman. And he talked about, like, I was confused because he wasn't maxing his 2-mile run, but he was in the gym training other things than just his 2-mile run, which is the thing he wasn't maxing, right? Like he was in there deadlifting and squatting and things like that. And Lieutenant Alex was all confused. I was like, what are you doing deadlifts and squats for? Shouldn't you only be training your run? Because that's the thing you're not maxing on your APFT.
So glad you've changed.
Hey, growth, man. It's important. I needed mentors and stuff.
Lieutenant Alex is incredibly annoying.
Probably. It's true.
Probably. Yeah, that's probably true.
You're probably wearing tights when you walked up to him too, weren't you?
He was the one. I don't think I owned any tights at that point, but he was the one who explained to me, like, hey, like I'm not here to train for the APFT. Like I'll take the APFT and I'll do good in the APFT and stuff, but that's not what drives my training. What drives my training is what I know I have to be prepared to do for my job. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the Ranger Regiment, like I think that we do that. And I think that we set conditions for people to understand that when they're in RASP. And we assess and select people who are about that and they want to be led and they want to be driven. And I think we talked about this when you came, Alex, is like the bread and butter of RASP1 to me is that with the exception of your like individualized critical events, which would be like your PT test and your 12-mile, there's like 7 or 8 cadre that do every single event with you. So if they're going to take you out and, like, here's a secret for the people going to RASP, there's an event called the 232 where you ruck 2 miles, you run 3 miles, and then you ruck another 2 miles. The cadre have their rucks on too. They're rucking with you. They're running with you. They're there the whole time. And I think that is so important to not only the assessment selection process for like, hey, we're getting eyes on, but for establishing a standard for expectation of how you're going to lead and how you're going to be led. It is a hard duty to be a RASP cadre. And I just like my hat is totally off to those guys. I go to work every day and I'm like the worst guy in the building because those guys show up and they pound the road and they get it done every day selflessly, really. And that to me is like, if you come in right from the very beginning and somebody just says, hey, look at my uniform, look at my attitude, look at my demeanor, look how much I care, look at my effort, and now follow me. That might be the way that you like change the culture. Or that might be the way like the ACFT doesn't really matter. Or when you're at the bottom of Talker Gar and it's like, hey, we got to go all the way up there to get our buddies. No one goes, well, not today. My back hurts, People go, yeah, Roger that, And I think that or what I hope that the Army starts to remember soon, because I fear sometimes that we kind of lose sight of it because we're not at war. Like, I can't take the grade out of Talker Gar. Like, I can't make that thing like less steep. I can't make the door-to-door fighting in Fallujah like require less courage. So what we need to make sure that we're doing every day, like you can't replicate that, but you can build resiliency. Like we know that. So like we can get into these like long debates about programming. I think Colonel Klepper talked about this too when he was on with you guys. Like we can do all that, or we can just get to work and build the things that we know matter like in war and also get fitter at the same time. Because like the conditions of like war fighting, they're not changing. Like they are what they are. The quality of candidate or person or whoever that shows up to your unit that you're upset about their fitness level, like you better start meeting them where they're at and getting them ready to go. Because the conditions of war are what they are. You can go on social media and see what's happening in Ukraine. Like that looks like World War I with automatic weapons.
Yeah. I think Ranger Regiment is a vivid example of something I've talked about a little bit before, but I think, and this is not an original thought from me, I read it somewhere, I just don't know where, but people tend to rise or fall to the expectations that are set for them, right? Like if you set a really low bar, people will settle into that comfortable low bar. And if you set a really high bar, people will strive for that really high bar. And I think we have an issue in the culture of, as soon as the Army for the first time said like, all right, I think we set that bar too high, we'll lower it. You get people saying like, oh, I guess it turns out we can get them to lower the bar. And that's not a good thing to have in people's heads. I think that's part of the core of the problem.
I think, it's like standard goal setting theory, right? If the goal is like so far away that you can't get there, you're going to just, you don't want to look in that mirror, right? So you're just going to discard it or discredit it. But if it's just hard enough, right? Or the people who are saying, hey, we're going to do this thing kind of meet you where you're at and you take it to scale, right? It's like, it becomes a little less daunting. And we battle that too. So like my last company that I was in, I said like, hey guys, we're going to run a 5-mile. And I told them like originally, I'm like, I don't care what your time is. I'm not going to have your time. The only people that are going to have your time are the strength and conditioning coaches, so that they can like batch you into your ability groups when we go into our next program. Like, I don't care what the time is. All I want you to do is just show up and do your best. And I actually think, and this is like, I could be totally wrong, I actually think people did better. when they're like, hey, I'm just here to like see where I'm at and make some progress. But when you tell them that, hey, so like I agree with what you said. I think where we get it wrong is we ask too much too soon, similar to the ACFT, and then we go, oh, why does no one want to do this? It's like, well, we were way out in front of them, you know. Maybe if we tell them like, hey, just pass the 5 mile, and in 8 weeks from now, like, hey, let's see if we can shave 30 seconds off. And 8 weeks later, let's see if we can get a minute off, right? I think that's an important part of just integrating, you know, back to one of Drew's previous questions, like how do you make cultural change? Like you just meet people where they're at and you keep them hopeful, but you do let them know like there's a really high standard here. And just because you can't do it right now, we're still going to love you anyway. But like we have a plan, and like you're being evaluated on your ability to like commit to the process that we're using to get you better. And if you're not going to do that, I don't know what we're going to do with you, you know? Super important. I think that's the military. That's just what it should be.
We've talked a couple of times now about strength coaches and the setup you guys have. And I want to switch gears a little bit here and just dive right into it. What is Ranger Athlete Warrior, or more famously, RAW?
RAW is it is what H2F is now, I think, right? I mean, RAW is the Ranger Athlete Warrior. So you have the same competencies. So you have the physical domain. So you have like your strength and conditioning aspect. You have the nutrition piece. You have the spiritual piece or the cognitive piece in there. Which one am I missing? I think I'm missing one.
Sleep.
Sleep.
There's a whole conversation there.
This is an odd pillar.
Well, we bin that one in with, I think, the cognitive one.
As well, you should.
But I think sleep is like, you know, if you were to build that thing out like a house, like sleep's probably the foundation of the whole thing. But you know why I know that? Because the Ranger Athlete Warrior, the human performance coaches have taught me that and educated me on that. I have an Aura ring on right now because they gave that to me to help me monitor my sleep and like make micro improvements to like my behavior. Okay, but what is the program? I think most people think of it as hey, there's just 2 coaches down the gym. If I want to get better, I'm going to go to them and I'm going to use them. But it's way more integrated than that. So that is certainly an aspect of it, right? Where you can go in, you can get programming. A lot of it is about the facilities that we have. Those are pretty nice. Those are pretty capable. And then on the periphery of that, you know, like if I strain my calf tomorrow, which I have a calf strain right now, so I can go down there and there's an athletic trainer and a physical therapist who on the spot, if they don't have a client, like can triage me, can help me out. They talk to the strength and conditioning coaches and go, hey, here's what's going on with him. And I'm able to continue working out. I'm able to continue doing the things that I need to do. And then from there, it's like, hey, if I'm really having trouble with my injury, maybe I talk to the cognitive lady, or she comes and finds me. And we talk about like some growth mindset stuff, and we frame this thing out, and we try to bring it all together. We try to embed that in our unit and even in RASP, really in everything we do. Which, Alex, I don't know if you ate in our chow hall. We have the best chow hall in the Army because we have people that are invested in making sure that the food that's in there is right. They understand the importance of it. And we have a lot of people that eat at our chow hall. Like our whole unit eats in our chow hall. And that is a byproduct of the Ranger Athlete Warrior program and the education aspect that is part of that. So I don't think I answered your question great, but it is really everything. And it's the utilization of it. And it's the education that is ongoing all the time. There's articles that come out. There's different challenges, which I think you guys posted one of them, like the pull-up challenge. And I think that is really what it is. It's about making sure that it's really not just about fitness. It's about wellness and making sure that we're ready and we're sharp. And I think the Army is trying to do that. And I hope that people just start getting on board because we'll be better for it.
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think RAW was like 2007 when it first began, something like that.
Vintage.
And
It did. Yeah.
I
and it's
imagine that was a
evolved.
pretty big cultural challenge in 2007 for an organization like Ranger Regiment that prides itself on its physicality and things like that. I imagine it was pretty tough to like open the door to subject matter experts coming in with like the tacit admission there that they weren't necessarily subject matter experts themselves. Can you talk about the process, that evolution of integrating it?
So I wasn't there for that initial part, but I do know from guys that were, they came out with like raw 1.0, right? And like some of the exercises that were in there were like, I don't know what the correct term would be, a ball that you throw it sideways through. What do you got?
What's the
What's the
name of it?
exercise?
Oh, it
Yeah.
depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Lateral med ball toss against the wall.
Yeah.
Or somebody
I
makes up a
think,
dumb name for it and calls it
Everybody
like,
loves calling it rotational, though.
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
rotational.
So whatever you want to call it. And I do know one story from a guy who was there. They actually built a wall at First Battalion because there was a lot of drills like that in there with a med ball. And people are like, these are dumb. This isn't helping me. But also culturally at that time, it's like you care about what you measure, really, right? So like if you measure the 12-mile ruck, like that's what you hang your hat on. If you measure the 5-mile run, that's what you hang your hat on. I think when the RPAC came into it, which was an evolution of raw, I don't know what year, that might have actually been right around 2007. It's been around for a while. You start to kind of diversify a little bit, but I think initially there was some resistance, but when you start to kind of show people that, hey, we're not crazy and we're actually going to make you better in combat and we're going to have you hurt less and take care of your body a little bit better. And oh, by the way, there's like POTIF money and other stuff tied to this where we're going to get facilities, like people kind of start to buy in. And it's not to say that we don't still have organizational challenges, right? There are still people who, I'm a big believer in like group training. Like I would love to just like get in a group of like 15 other people, like we're like a football team almost, and work out together. And I think that that's really important. But there are people who are like, oh, I need this certain program because this is what works for me. A good program works for 80% of the people 100% of the time. And I think that raw kind of showed us that like, hey, if you actually just do this stuff, like you're actually going to get better and you're not going to be as hurt. So by the time that 2010, 11 came around, I think that's when we started to get the first strength and conditioning coaches. So you can imagine that the whole tactical athlete thing, like I don't even think it was a thing then. It was maybe this very nascent idea of just like, what does that even mean? So like some of the coaches that we got, they're football guys, and a lot of them are still around. So they were adapting too, and they were growing too, but they knew enough of what they were doing to have us ready to go. And that was where you started to like see some of the things that I think the Army's going through, where it's like, hey, I'm not going to trust this guy because he's not a Ranger. What does he know about combat? I've been deployed 4 times, or I've been deployed 5 times. I think we're kind of beyond that now, but initially there was a lot of that in there. But as the program evolved, it provided resources, in the performance of the Rangers kind of started to speak for itself. The guys who really bought into it, I think there's no looking back now, really.
Do you think that, I mean, because that last point you mentioned, it hits close to home, just the idea of somebody who hasn't been deployed 4 or 5 times, whatever, doesn't know what they're talking about. Do you think that is just the easy button excuse for not maybe exposing yourself to something you're unfamiliar with versus, I mean, because I think of, a lot of the strength coaches that I know and have worked with, and even outside of the military setting, like football, basketball, collegiate sport, whatever. Sure, some of them have competed in that sport and competed well, but a lot of them maybe haven't. And I don't think in every single instance that means that they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And you hear it in the Army now, like you mentioned, it's like the easy excuse to avoid, getting with a strength coach, getting a program, training in a way that you may be unfamiliar with. And you look at a lot of the people making that excuse and it's like, man, my mom could probably train you better than you're training yourself right now. So the fact that this guy or gal has not been in the military seems like a bit of a cop out. And I kind of went on a bit of a rant there. Sorry, Mom. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I could have a really emotional reaction to that one. So my first thought is like, hey, the people that are saying that, what are you saying it because you've been to combat? If so, like, what is your rank? Because like, we haven't really been like slugging it out recently. Some units have, very select, small group of people, right? And if you have been slugging it out, like, are you basing your entire fitness plan on the one firefight that you got in or the one mission that you went on? Because that's probably not a good idea either. But I think that it is really about fear, right? So if you're like, hey, you asked me to program something out for myself, we're putting squats in there, we're putting heavy cleans in there, and I'm going to do all the things that I'm good at, right? And I'm going to value the things that I'm good at over the things that I'm not good at, even if it doesn't make any sense. I think that's all that's really happening is like people are like, the plank, for example, or the leg tuck. Sorry, we'll give Alex some love here. Like, why did people hate the leg tuck so much? It's because they weren't good at it. And it was kind of weird. And there was some timing in there. And there's like some other components to it. So instead of going, man, this is a tough thing, but I can understand the value of it, we're just going to commit to it. What do? We discredit it. And then we discredit the people who say that it's a good idea because they haven't been to combat. That's just ignorance. And I think that, back to like the Ranger Athlete Warrior program, like how we overcome that in the Ranger Regiment is the fittest guys in the unit are the most bought into the coaches. They're the most bought into what the coaches tell them. It's disappointing, but I see it. Like I'm here and I see the NCOAs like right down the street, and I see people like walking across the street during PT hours. And part of me thinks that like that is just because they don't really know what to do. Right. So the APFT kind of deconstructed some of that for us because like if you're just going to do the APFT, it's like you always know what to do. You're going to do some push-ups, do some sit-ups, you go for a run. Well, now it's like we open this like aperture up and we went, hey, it's so much more than that. And you take that and you go, oh, people aren't good at it. Well, they don't want to come talk to you as their strength coach. But the thing that I think that people don't understand is like, I look at the strength and conditioning coaches, I could go in there and I could tell them anything. I could be like, man, I've been drinking too much. I'm overweight. I'm not doing great. My 5 mile time sucks. And you know what they would say? We got you, dude. Come in. We're going to take care of you. That is a totally different thing than if somebody comes into their platoon sergeant and tells them that same thing. Right? So, why do I think it is? I think it's fear. I think it's ignorance, but there's just like this whole other side to it that people are missing. Because like you as a strength and conditioning coach, what is like the skin in the game for you? It's just to take care of these guys. It's not to write their eval. Right. And like, what are you evaluating them on? Like their effort, that they showed up, they listened to you. Like, so I think my message to those people is like, stop doing that. Just listen to these people. They're paid to help you. They're not judging you.
So speaking of the difference between the coach's role and the NCO's role, I'm going to ask a two-part question here. And the first, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about this before, both on the Instagram and the podcast, is that balance of NCOs and coaches who has like what piece of physical training and things like that. But I'm also curious about specifically in that RASP assessment and selection environment, like how involved is the human performance staff in like developing how you operate that as well?
They're pretty involved. We involve them like iteratively. So we kind of like lock in on like, hey, we're doing this. This is kind of what it is. So I'll give you an example without giving away all the secrets. And I think we went over Metagon over this. Like there's a portion of RASP1, and I'm not going to give the secret away, but it's the first 2 weeks. That is really, really hard. And it is really taxing on the central nervous system. And we probably take people to the point where They can't really recover. And we know this because we take them out on events, and it's like they want to give the effort, but it's like they're reaching in this empty box, right? And we see it. Well, that third week, it's not easy, but it's easier, right? And like, what is that third week for? And who came up with that plan? Like, not a sergeant, right? That was like somebody who understands physiology and like looked at the load, like how many times we were carrying a ruck, what was the distance that we went, what were the events that we were doing, how many were upper body focused, how many were lower body focused, and mapped this thing out and said, okay, there's a chance that actually by the time that they go into the fourth week, they could be ready, because the fourth week is coal range, and that's like the hardest week of the whole program. They could actually be like really ready to go out there and like show you what you're looking for. So the coaches are absolutely a part of it. The nutritionist is absolutely a part of it, of making sure that like, we have the right plan for these people to feed them and take care of them and make sure that we're not asking them to do something that's totally impossible, like calorically or whatever. And then what do NCOs own? Well, the NCOs own the same thing that NCOs own in the Army. They own execution. And they own this like dutiful responsibility to their commander if they see opportunities to make improvements, to tactfully and respectfully bring those to the table and say, hey, this is why I think we need to change this, and here's like the information I have for you. That's what the NCOs own, is like the execution phase. We definitely will take input from the cadre of like what's working and what's not working. But in terms of like massive program overhaul, like we're going to get the professionals in there. We're going to lay this thing out. We're going to take a look at it together.
This could probably be its own podcast entirely, but I've seen this happen before with selection programs like this, where you get this influx of data now that we're kind of in 2023. Like you mentioned wearables, and everybody wants to monitor everything. Has data changed any of this process? And if so, has that been sort of a net positive, or do you think it's just created a bit of a burden?
Well, part of the struggle is that because I think we are a really small selection program compared to like SWIC, which is, it's probably 5 times the size. I wouldn't even be able to like venture how big it is. The manner in which we've captured the data and the mechanisms that we've used has been varied. So it hasn't always been easy to like aggregate it in a centralized spot so that we could use it. What do we use the data for now? Well, I'll just give you like a real world example. It's like we're looking at like components of the PT test and trying to correlate them to like people who voluntarily withdraw from the program. So like, you could probably just sitting there be like, hey, yeah, if you can't run fast, you're probably going to voluntarily withdraw. But we want to know like what that point is, right? Another one that's kind of popped up recently, which it is not supported by a very good p-value yet, but I think a couple more classes of data, like upper body pulling strength measured by pinups. Well, why is that helpful? Well, we do a lot of rope climbs. We climb over walls a lot. We do a lot of obstacles. So like if you're asked to go repeatedly up to the top of the 30-foot rope, and that's terrifying for you, right? And you feel like you're going to die at the top, like maybe you will voluntarily withdraw. So is that like a RSOP attribute problem? Or is that like we haven't appropriately prepared this person problem? So we look at all of it. When we look at the changing the PT test to match the ACFT, we were doing, like regression analysis on like everything. Like if you could tell me how many push-ups you did, and I could tell you what your RPAT time was, plus or minus like 90 seconds, right? Which I know that's a big range, but it's relatively good, because we were trying to figure out like, hey, and I'm sure the Army did this for the ACFT, like, hey, we already have this known thing. And how does that translate out into these other unknown things, right? We're trying to do this predictive process. So we use that quite a bit, but I will tell you, we are not hostages to it. I think our command uses it for information, But I think above all else, they are, the quote, our regimental sergeant major, he cares about culture over capability every day and twice on Tuesday. And that's not to say that like we're just going to keep it hard because it needs to be hard. It's actually the opposite, right? It's actually like, hey, if this thing that we're doing isn't telling us anything, like let's put something in here that is, or let's use these blocks maybe to teach somebody something and to make an input. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, it's perfect.
we use it, but we're not prisoners to it.
I like that a lot. We have crossed the hour mark here, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I do also want to give you an opportunity before we wrap this thing up. Is there anything that we have not hit on in this conversation that we should have? Is there anything that you want people, whether it's the broader Army, whether it's human performance staffs, whatever it is, are there messages you want to get out that we haven't set you up to talk about yet?
I think, I probably should say a little bit more about RASP, just like that people should try to come to the Ranger Regiment because, you're going to be led by the best people who care about you, have the resources and capability to make you great. I don't know. Do you have any ideas on that?
I think there's something there because we weren't talking about RASP for large parts of it, but I think in a pretty big way we were, because we kind of talked about like setting a high bar and striving for it and culture of performance and leading by example and all those things. And I think the reason we talked about those things is because RASP embodies those in a pretty significant way, and Ranger Regiment itself embodies those in a pretty significant way. And so I don't know if we set the episode up as necessarily a recruiting thing for Ranger Regiment necessarily, but I think there's something there about like, hey,
I'm inspired.
Yeah, if this appeals to you, there's a place you can go live in that culture.
Yeah, I think okay. So if I think then what I would want people to know is like, hey, in respect to like H2F, right? Because like I believe in this stuff like, big time. I wish that everyone the whole Army would just like buy all the way in. For the strength and conditioning coaches and the people that are a part of this, you got to understand that it's not going to happen overnight and to not get discouraged. Because if you were to go back, you brought up the Ranger Athlete Warrior from 2007, like I'll find you somebody to tell you that story. And I'm pretty sure it's not a good one, right? I'm pretty sure there's resistance in there. I don't know if Nick Behringer was in there. I know you guys talk to him all the time. Like he could probably tell you. I could find you some other guys that were there. Change, even in a high performing unit, it doesn't happen quickly, right? It comes in these like little incremental gains. And if you're a strength and conditioning coach and you're coming from like a football world, which a lot of them do, and you're responsible for like how many games Alabama won this year in their injury rate, and you want everybody to line up and get in the rack and do it your way, like that's not going to work. And you just got to know that. Like you might have to lower your standard to just like, hey, everybody came to practice with a water bottle today, or everybody came to training with a water bottle today. And like half of them made breakfast before they came. Like that might be like your first point of influence, and that's okay. Don't give up. You got to meet people where they're at. Our nation actually needs you to do that. We talked a little bit about the initial, the condition of just our country's youth and all that, which that's a whole nother podcast, right? But like, don't worry about all that. Like these people show up to your facility every day. Like, don't lose the faith. Like, show up every day pumped up to inspire somebody, to meet them where they're at, to give them your best effort, and know that like this is probably a decade-long process that we're in. I think it has been for the Ranger Regiment. And we still have hiccups and things still aren't perfect, but it is critically important. You got to show up every day, pumped up, ready to try to make someone better. That's what we do in the Ranger Regiment. I think, in my opinion, I go to work every day pumped up, and guess what? If I'm not, the strength and conditioning coaches usually are, and so are the guys to my left and right, at least a couple of them. So I hope that's what everyone can carry out of it as we work to make the Army better, implement the ACFT, whatever it may be. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
I'll shout out to, you mentioned it earlier in the conversation. Their human performance staff does post like monthly challenges that they do. So if you're curious and like want to see where you stack up, they usually post some of the results that Rangers are getting on those challenges. Highly encourage joining in.
We'll put the @ in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely check it out. I've only been able to like participate in person one time. I was out there with 275 and jumped in, and I was pretty proud of myself getting the bottom spot on the leaderboard.
Yeah.
They got some studs.
You just didn't do it right. You just got to pick the ones that play to your strengths. Like you just don't do them unless you're good at them, right? Isn't that like the right way to behave?
Absolutely. If you're the strongest person in the gym, you're in the right gym.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought I was doing that. I thought I was picking a workout I would do well at because it had rope climbs and I'm good at rope climbs. And what I did not realize is that in this particular workout, the rope climbs were the recovery. It was tank sled pushes and rope climbs, and man, that tank ruined my day.
Yeah, there are some just freaky guys here, but it keeps you honest, keeps you humble, keeps you working every day.
Is there? I mean, we asked this to everybody we have on. Just is there a place people can go to find more? And I mean, the obvious answer is yeah, go to Ranger School and then go to RASP1, and But is there a place that comes to mind, or maybe a clearinghouse of a place people can go to find out more about just the environment, the process, the program, any of that?
There's a lot of bad information on the internet.
Say, don't go to Reddit.
But I think our recruiting, we have a 75th like recruiting Instagram. We have YouTube videos. So there's like a great, like if you just want to know the spirit of the Ranger Regiment, right? Like what is this thing about? There's a 6-part video that covers the Ranger Creed. Like just watch those 6 videos and be like, and then you just make your decision, right? Like, are those people that I want to be around or not? We have kind of increased the social media stuff because it's, I think, important. People look at it, they pay attention to it. But in terms of like a credible resource, I don't really know because I don't really seek them out. So I'm not sure. And also like we kind of hang our hats on like Rangers don't write books, but that might be to our detriment at points, But I think, yeah, the recruiting page, YouTube, the YouTube page is pretty good. And then you can hit us up on the Instagram and we'll talk to you.
Slide into the Ranger DMs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. I think there's been a ton of nuggets in here. Alex is going to have a hard time getting one soundbite for the beginning. So we appreciate this.
I recently had like a coach expressing to me that it felt like some of our episodes recently had not been as aimed at coaches as some of our earlier episodes. And this one seemed squarely aimed like there's a lot here for soldiers to consider for Ranger Regiment and things like that, but there was a lot of talking directly to human performance staff. So I think they'll appreciate that.
Those guys are like my favorite guys.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.